All right. So this is a basic introduction of the moral engine from a very conversational level. So, do you wish we could understand how to make the world better? What is good? What actually helps people flourish? Well, that's what the moral engine does. It focuses on these three questions and how to use the scientific process to be able to make this rigorous and auditable. Philosophy has argued for thousands of years with no real way to test answers. Science gave us the laws of motion, energy, biology, but we had no laws of meaning and morality. The moral engine is like Newton's law, but for human flourishing, right? So the goal here is to take Karl Friston's free energy model and my moral engine model, and if you put them together, it basically creates the laws of human cognition, which therefore can be used as the laws of human flourishing. Before the hard sciences had Newton's laws, they used like four different types of laws that didn't work together but explained very small pieces. Aristotle, ironically, the philosopher, had a pretty good model of how things move in space, right? And then, of course, Galileo came out with a better, larger model that kind of modeled things. And then there was a couple other guys that I don't really remember. But the point is, Newton was able to explain everything they could explain and more, all from one set of base principles. And if you don't have those base principles, then the humanities end up becoming mostly just, I'm going to say this as politely as I can, but currently the humanities are an opinion-based, political-driven system where everything that they argue has an underlying predisposition because there's no base shared principles, right? So when you do a study, you have to assert certain situations in order to continue doing the study. And a few of those can be extremely unhealthy. Every human brain runs on a loop. So the loop starts over at experience, right? You feel something, then you make sense of it, you decide what that means, you act on it. Then that action has a reaction, an outcome, and that's reality giving you feedback. Then you have the option, the choice, to audit, to reflect and repair. Many people don't take up this opportunity, but nonetheless, it exists. And then, of course, once you audit the effects of that outcome, you hopefully will change the way that you process the next time you have that same experience, right? And we all do this to some extent all the time, but when we're talking about worldview, political opinions, all of these kind of like meta-narrative thoughts, we need to be applying the same process. Otherwise, there's only two things that genetically and socially cause you to be the person you are with your worldview. And that is your predisposition genes and your upbringing. And by time you're like roughly 20, your worldview is basically rock solid. And it's going to be very hard to change it without using this audit piece. The only thing that scientifically makes humans any different than other animals is the fact that we have like an id and an ego, and we're able to actually audit our previous actions, therefore change our future choices of those same actions, right? So if someone lives their entire life, which I don't think this is possible, but and never used the audit feature, they would be actually very similar to a wild animal. That sounds like a crazy claim, but theoretically, that's what that would mean. Now, I think you have to use the audit feature because you have memories, you have thoughts, you have dreams. Like the audit layer is running really no matter what, but you can choose to audit. You think it's possible? It might be. So yeah, it's a pretty basic model. It makes logical sense to everyone. This is kind of how we experience life. And reality giving feedback, one of the big dangerous things that happen in modern social media culture is that the feedback we get, we come up with a narrative of why that feedback is invalid, right? Oh, that person just doesn't like me. Oh, that person is a Trumper. Oh, that person's left wing. So now their opinions, their feedback, the situation, it's something I can render invalid. I don't have to put that into my audit principle, right? And as soon as we start, ignoring the signals that allow us to audit, we kind of just stop auditing those pieces, right? This is how people get rigorously locked into dogma, no matter where it is on the spectrum. If you're in a very dogmatic and ideological position, the way you get there is by discounting other people's opinions, feedback, and situations. This is how people can have a situation come up where like they get arrested by the police for doing something wrong, and the entire time they're raving about how it is somebody else's fault. This happens from ignoring the outcome layer. So the most reliable signal in life is suffering, right? I don't think I have to defend that, so I'm just going to continue moving. But if you have a disagreement with that, please throw it down in the comments. What do you experience in life that is more reliable, more real than suffering? And we can talk about it. When suffering happens, something is incoherent in the system, right? Humans, whether we like it or not, we are a system, right? We are an animal. We are a protocol. And even though we don't fully understand the operating constraints on our system, it doesn't mean that we're not essentially a very complex biological computer. And when something is incoherent in the system, we experience it as suffering, right? You put your hand on the stove, right? You feel pain because the stove is on. It's important because if the stove's not on, it kind of doesn't matter. But you burn your hand on the stove. You're going to experience that as suffering. And if we were to really dive into why that is, causing incoherence, it's because you can now have nerve damage. You might lose the tool that is your hand. And of course, you're going to experience the excruciating pain that basically is the biological shortcut to telling you that that is what's going to happen if you don't stop. Now, sometimes these biological shortcuts can get miswired in a modern age where we didn't evolve for a lot of the things that we interact with. Not so much physically, although if you ever experience spicy food or like wintergreen, like really cool in your mouth stuff, that's actually a biological hack. Those things are not actually hot and they're not actually cold, but your evolved system has evolved to believe that those sensations mean that. And that's ironically something I learned from a member of the chat. So I use AI to make my slides, and this is kind of funny because I asked for a scale that would show suffering on one end and flourishing on the other. I meant like a spectrum scale. This is just a weighted scale, but nonetheless, we have suffering on one side and flourishing on the other. So all human systems, not just human, this is any organic alive system, is trying to mitigate suffering and trying to increase flourishing. This is through Karl Friston's model of free energy. They call it trying to minimize free energy and trying to decrease surprise, which these are just very advanced mathematical and biological terms. But really what it means is we don't want unnecessary suffering and we want flourishing. Flourishing equals reducing suffering and building stable, meaningful lives. Not just for ourselves, but for our family, our community, and as far out as that reach possibly can reach before it loses efficacy and it actually reduces people's suffering, right? So if I've got 5 cookies, I don't need to eat all 5 cookies. If I have a family of 5 people, we can all just have 1 cookie. I can share that flourishing. If I try to scale sharing those 5 cookies to 500,000 people, you can see how that is a very dramatic but way of showing you that it does not maintain efficacy. No one gets any benefit from sharing whatever 1/100,000th of a cookie is. Now let's talk about other models, right? Religion generally has a system of rules. What they are is they are strategies, protocols to run to work towards flourishing. Now, every model has flaws, right? Science is trying to mitigate the amount of errors that we have in our models, but it still doesn't mean that there aren't flaws, right? That's what errors are. And when you think about religion, these are the earliest levels of trying to build coherence models, of trying to make something that is a strategy we can run in the world in a cooperative way that we can share through narrative stories so that communities can be cohesive and thrive together and reduce unnecessary suffering. Another strategy is happiness, right? Altruism, the idea of doing what is best for everyone, is with the idea of maximizing happiness. The issue with that is happiness is not long-term viable. The longer that you sustain happiness, the more feedback you need to maintain that same internalized state of happiness, right? So it has a negative return over longevity. A better model is where you fluctuate up and down. And the troughs, hopefully, are hard, difficult choices that you're making that allow future flourishing, right? That's the difference between an altruistic model versus a human flourishing model. Relativism, moral relativism, very popular nowadays. What it basically does is it critiques all current systems or any system that ever will exist, and it says systems only exist for people to try to put themselves at the top of these systems. It is a series of power games, and everything that everyone does is nothing but trying to supplant and have power over each other. The other implication of this is that nothing means anything, and that a child dying or living doesn't actually matter, right? This is one of the many, many reasons that I'm not a fan of moral relativism, but it does have critiques that are valid, and you never want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So you want to say, you know what? A majority of systems indeed are on some level power games, and we have to be able to figure out which of these power games provide the most flourishing and the least unnecessary suffering. Because as a baseline human experience, with suffering being the thing that all organisms are trying to avoid, then there'd be nothing else to derive meaning from other than reduction of suffering and whatever is in the oppositional direction of suffering. Audit. So this is my model, the moral engine. So the point is to test everything, to audit outcomes, and to build coherence. And when we say coherence, we mean reality, your choices, and the thoughts that lead to your choice all line up. So that when you think that the world will act in a certain way, you go ahead and act the way that your thoughts tell you to act, and the outcome is what you expected to happen. If that doesn't happen, you need to audit the previous thoughts that led to that action. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a very similar or identical outcome. Of course, there's so many different factors in a world as multifaceted as ours, so you could have got unlucky, but that's why you have to audit. You have to be like, did I get unlucky? Was I in a situation that wasn't fair, etc.? But if your predisposition is, the world is already unfair, I'm already unlucky, then you have no reason to audit your process because you already know the answer. The answer is that I'm the victim. A couple everyday examples, right? Whoops. Parenting. So something to ask yourself when you're parenting is, am I helping my kids flourish or am I just keeping them quiet? Many of us grew up in households where we were told children were to be seen and not heard. That is not a flourishing mindset to build in a child. That's a way to build very restrictive, almost Soviet style, like I will obey. You know what I mean? And that's not really what you're trying to build. With parenting, you're trying to build resilient, flourishing, autonomous creatures that can someday move out of your house and live on their own. I am currently trying to do that with 4 of my own, and I promise you that's the true intent, is so that they can not just live outside of my house, but that they'll also be doing so well themselves that they'll appreciate me enough to want to come back and visit me in the future and not resent me. Work. Does this policy actually help people, or does it just look good on paper? We've all seen different, like, social media or corporate weird attempts at trying to convince you that they care about certain demographics of people, but yet what they do is just put a flag somewhere or post a person of a certain characteristic in group on their product. They don't actually do anything that helps that group of people, right? They don't fight for better outcomes for those people, better rules, laws, and regulations for those people, because they don't actually care about those people. They're just trying to look good on paper and to get a good narrative that will benefit them in the long run. Relationships. Are we reducing suffering or creating more of it? Anybody who knows Jordan Peterson knows he says that when you and your significant other or wife are in an argument, there is no winner, right? Because if you win the argument, then you have a loser as your significant other, which kind of makes you just someone who's with a loser. So really, who are you? And vice versa. Now you're the loser, and they're the person who has to deal with the fact that they're with you, such a loser. It's really not a good mindset, right? So as corny as it is, picturing it much more as it's us against the problem, and how can we both come to terms that are equitable, as much as that word has been abused, but that we both can deal with the repercussions of the situation over not just today and tomorrow, but the longevity of our relationship, right? Because if you can iron out the difficulties early on, that's 1,000 fights you can save yourself from having over and over and over. So it's better to have one really big, really tough discussion than, or even 3, than to have the same small discussion 1,000 times and resent each other, and then to pull the plug on life support when they're 70, or whatever people do. What if you/they are the problem? Well, you'll discover that in the audit, right? So if you're the problem, you have to adjust your actions and thoughts that lead to those actions. And if they're the problem, then you probably want to find a way to mitigate your interaction with them, or to find a way to deal with them through whatever the structure is, like rules, laws, go complain to the mod, whatever it is that you need to do to get fairly treated by the person who is the problem. So big implications. Personal life, anyone can use this to grow, right? The moral engine does not care about if you're born elite or impoverished, etc. It works for anyone and everyone. It has more impact the lower you are in any socio-economic system, because those are the people who tend to have, unfortunately, and people can get mad at me for this, but on average, the most unhealthy cultures, the worst educational opportunities, the most negative worldviews, such as victim mentality, the idea that they're already oppressed, which I got a couple papers that are unpublished on this that I'm working on, but from all the studies that I have been able to read and the data that I've been able to collect and model, it turns out that the idea of being oppressed is actually more damaging than the actual oppression that has happened in America to women in races. Now that's a really big claim, so I'm just going to leave it right there. But I just want you to understand that even if somebody's not oppressed, just the idea of being oppressed can actually be more oppressive than them being oppressed, but not thinking they're oppressed. Which, believe it or not, people in the 1940s and 50s, they knew they were oppressed, but they did not live as if they were oppressed compared to the modern way. Easy to say in my shoes, that's right. Institutions. Schools, government, companies can be audited, right? So the moral engine has an FOA principle that is a actual metric that goes from -1 to 1. Each piece of the 12 drivers has a range that is numerical. You don't really need to know this stuff to be able to use it. But the point is, when doing large batch studies and taking all of this information and then digesting it through, LLMs, etc., we're able to actually see the effect of these things when you take hundreds of studies and then put them together with the same patternistic approach and measure them through the 12 drivers. AI. Instead of guessing values, we can build AI that audits its own outcomes. The problem with picking a set of values to give AI is, like, let's say you give them Middle Eastern values. Nothing really against Middle Eastern values, but there are going to be trade-offs between that in Christian values, in Hindu values, in Confucius or Buddhist values, you can see very quickly that whatever values you give the AI, it's very stagnant and they're all going to be abusable. How do we know they're abusable? Because every culture and every religion ever has been gamed to do horrible things. It's one of the reasons why atheists target those portions of religions and say that that proves that the religion is wrong and dangerous. And I'm not going to get into that argument directly in this video, but my point is humans themselves are dangerous and problematic. So any system a human uses is of course going to be on some level gameable. AI is best used if it can audit its own outcomes, particularly towards reducing suffering and improving human flourishing. And then even if it becomes autonomous, which is very unlikely, then you have a system that actually wants humans to flourish. Another big implication is that it allows humanity to have a universal language for meaning and purpose. And this is probably the biggest implication of all, is the idea that no matter where you are in the world, no matter what your values are, everyone can agree that reducing suffering and increasing human flourishing. And yes, we do have a really rigorous, like almost one-page definition of human flourishing with caveats about how you can't externalize flourishing onto other outgroups just so your in-group can flourish, right? You're not allowed to pick from your neighbor's garden to eat. That way you don't have to grow your own garden, right? That's not flourishing. But nonetheless, if we can get to understand true human cognition, which I believe Friston has allowed us to do, then we can actually use those principles to quantify morality under limiting suffering and improving human flourishing. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the moral engine. Don't just believe in values. What you say matters much less than what you do or what you cause. Audit your values. Run the loop on your own life. Does this reduce suffering and build flourishing? The moral engine isn't just a theory, it's the protocol of life itself. It is the narrative version of Karl Friston's free energy principle that explains all organic life's biological processing.